The quiet way you lose yourself. Most people do not lose themselves in one dramatic moment. They lose themselves quietly. A small reaction here, a pointless argument there, a need to explain, a need to be understood, a need to prove they are not weak, not wrong, not behind, not forgotten. At first, it feels harmless. You answer one message you should have ignored. You defend yourself to someone who was never trying to understand you. You check for approval before doing the thing you already know you should do. You let one insult sit in your mind longer than it deserves, then another, and slowly, without noticing, your attention stops belonging to you. It belongs to noise. It belongs to people who do not carry your future. It belongs to opinions that do not understand your path. It belongs to every small disturbance that knows exactly how to pull you away from yourself. That is not focus. That is captivity. And this is where Stoicism begins. Not with motivation. Not with a loud transformation. Not with a new identity you announce to the world. It begins with one uncomfortable realization. You cannot have inner peace while your mind is owned by everything outside you. Stay with that for a moment, because this explains why so many people feel exhausted even when they have not done anything meaningful. They are tired, not from effort, but from fragmentation. Their energy has been scattered across reactions, comparisons, explanations, memories, worries, and imagined judgments. They are not weak. They are divided. One part of them wants growth. One part wants comfort. One part wants discipline. One part wants approval. One part wants peace. One part keeps running toward the very noise that destroys it. And division is exhausting. You may think your problem is stress. You may think your problem is people. You may think your problem is the world being chaotic, unfair, loud, or disrespectful. But often, the deeper problem is this. You have trained your mind to leave itself too easily. Someone criticizes you, and your whole day bends around it. Someone ignores you, and your mind creates stories. Someone misunderstands your choice, and suddenly you are defending a life they never had the courage to live. The world does not need to control you directly. It only needs to control your attention. Once it controls your attention, it controls your mood. Once it controls your mood, it influences your decisions. Once it influences your decisions, it shapes your identity. That is why focus on yourself is not a soft phrase. It is not self-care decoration. It is a discipline. It means taking back the part of your mind that has been rented out to noise. It means noticing how often you abandon yourself just to manage how others see you. It means seeing how much energy you spend explaining, reacting, comparing, waiting, checking, and wondering. And then it asks a harder question. Who are you when no one is watching? Not who you claim to be, not who you perform as, not who you become when praise is available. Who are you in absence? That question is where many people become uncomfortable, because absence removes performance. No applause, no witness, no audience, no external pressure, no one rewarding the image you want to show. Only you. And when you are alone with yourself, the truth becomes harder to edit. You see the promises you broke quietly. You see the discipline you postponed. You see the habits you defended because admitting the truth would disturb your self-image. That is why many people avoid silence. They do not fear emptiness. They fear exposure. They fear meeting the version of themselves that cannot be polished for public perception. And yet, that is where real strength begins. Stoicism teaches that peace does not come from controlling the world. It comes from controlling the part of yourself that keeps handing power to the world. That is not easy, because the world rewards performance. It rewards noise. It rewards visibility. It rewards people who can appear confident, healed, disciplined, successful, and unbothered. But appearance is not strength. Sometimes the person who looks composed is simply good at hiding internal conflict. Sometimes the person who talks most about growth is still avoiding the first honest conversation with themselves. Sometimes the person who says, "I am focusing on myself," is not focusing on the self at all. They are focusing on an image, a version of themselves they hope others will admire. That is the first fracture. You cannot build inner peace on a false self. You cannot create mental strength from performance. You cannot become stable while your identity depends on being confirmed by people who do not live inside your mind. So the Stoic path asks something different. It asks you to stop performing long enough to see what is real. It asks you to withdraw your attention from noise, not because the world is evil, but because your mind cannot become strong while it is constantly divided. It asks you to return to yourself, not the self you advertise. The self you must live with when everything becomes quiet. That is where the path begins. Not outside, inward, the false self you keep protecting. Most people think they are focusing on themselves, but often they are protecting a version of themselves, a constructed identity, a story, a public image. This version wants to be seen as disciplined. It wants to be seen as strong. It wants to be seen as calm, mature, intelligent, valuable, and in control. But wanting to be seen as something is not the same as becoming it. And this is where the false self becomes dangerous. It does not always look fake. Sometimes it looks productive. Sometimes it looks ambitious. Sometimes it looks like self-improvement. Sometimes it even uses the language of growth, healing, peace, and discipline. You tell people your goals before you have earned the right to believe them. You explain your plans before your actions have given them weight. You speak about discipline while still negotiating with every small discomfort. And for a moment, it feels good, because the image receives a reward before the identity is built. That is the trap. The false self loves the feeling of progress more than the cost of progress. It loves being admired for what it intends to become. It loves being praised for the direction, not the result. It loves being seen before it has been proven. But the real self is built in the opposite direction. It is built when no one is watching. It is built when there is no reward. It is built when the only proof is whether you keep your word to yourself. And that is why the Stoic path is so uncomfortable. It removes the audience. It takes away easy rewards. It forces you to confront a quiet truth. Your identity is not what you say you value. It is what you repeatedly choose. You may say you value peace, but if you keep feeding arguments, your real value is reaction. You may say you value strength, but if you collapse every time someone misunderstands you, your real value is approval. You may say you value focus, but if your day belongs to every distraction that calls your name, your real value is escape. This is not meant to shame you. It is meant to make you accurate. Because without accuracy, there is no growth. Many people are not weak because they lack potential. They are weak because they are dishonest about what their daily choices reveal. And dishonesty with yourself creates psychological tension. You feel it when your words and actions do not match. You feel it when you promise change but keep returning to the same pattern. You feel it when you want respect from the world while quietly losing respect for yourself. That kind of tension is heavy. It follows you even when nobody knows the truth, because you know. And the mind cannot build peace on private betrayal. This is why inner peace is not relaxation. It is alignment. Peace begins when the person you claim to be and the person you practice being start moving closer together. Until then, your mind stays divided. One part wants comfort, one part wants growth, one part wants recognition, one part wants discipline, one part wants truth, One part wants the easiest escape. That division becomes your exhaustion. Not life, not people, division. And the false self survives by keeping you divided. It says, just explain yourself one more time. It says, just prove them wrong. It says, just make them understand. It says, just show them you are changing. But the real self does not need to be announced. It needs to be practiced. This is where many people lose the path. They confuse expression with transformation. They believe that because they can describe their growth, they are growing. They believe that because they understand a principle, they have embodied it. They believe that because they feel inspired, they have changed. But understanding is not embodiment. Inspiration is not identity. Words are not proof. The Stoic does not ask, how do I appear strong? The Stoic asks, where am I still controlled? That question cuts deeper because it turns the focus inward, not toward enemies, not toward critics, not toward people who failed to value you, toward the parts of yourself that still depend on them. And that is where real focusing begins. When you stop asking the world to confirm who you are and start examining why you needed confirmation in the first place. This is painful because it removes the comfort of blaming everyone else. It shows you that some of your suffering is not caused by what happened, but by what you keep feeding afterward. It shows you that some of your anger is not justice, but wounded pride. It shows you that some of your silence is not wisdom, but resentment waiting to be noticed. Not all growth is clean. Some growth is just pain becoming productive. Some discipline is just fear dressed as control. Some detachment is just a person too afraid to admit they still care. And this is why focusing on yourself must go deeper than ambition. It must ask what your growth is serving. If your discipline still needs an enemy, it is not freedom yet. If your peace still depends on proving something, it is not peace yet. If your strength exists mainly to be witnessed, it is still fragile. Stoicism does not invite you to become impressive. It invites you to become free. Free from the need to be constantly interpreted correctly. Free from the hunger to prove your worth. Free from the hidden desire to turn your healing into evidence against someone else. That freedom begins with honesty. And honesty begins when the false self stops leading. Your attention becomes your character. Attention is not a small thing. It is the substance of your life. Whatever holds your attention long enough begins to shape your perception. Whatever shapes your perception begins to shape your emotions. Whatever shapes your emotions begins to shape your choices. And your choices become your character. That is why distraction is not harmless. It does not just waste time. It trains your mind to abandon direction. Every time you react to something meaningless, you teach your attention that noise deserves authority. Every time you check for approval, you teach your nervous system that peace must come from outside. Every time you defend yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you trade inner strength for external control. And the cost is not obvious at first. You do not feel yourself becoming weaker in one moment. You feel it later, when sitting still becomes uncomfortable, when deep work feels impossible, when silence feels threatening, when you cannot make a decision without imagining how it will be judged. This is how a person becomes dependent without noticing. Not dependent on one person, dependent on external signals. A reply, a reaction, a compliment, a sign that they still matter, a sign that they are still being seen. And because these signals are unstable, their peace becomes unstable. This is why Stoicism places so much weight on attention. The Stoic does not waste energy trying to control every event. He controls the gate, what enters the mind, what stays there, what deserves response, what deserves silence. Con 10. Con 10. That is strength, not coldness, not emotional suppression. Strength is the ability to choose where your inner life goes. Most people never develop this ability because they confuse access with importance. Just because something reaches you does not mean it deserves you. A message can reach you and still not deserve your peace. A criticism can reach you and still not deserve your reaction. A memory can reach you and still not deserve your whole day. This is where mental strength becomes practical. It is not about feeling powerful. It is about refusing to donate your mind to every passing disturbance. And this requires a different relationship with discomfort. Because the moment you stop reacting, discomfort appears. You feel the urge to respond, the urge to explain, the urge to correct the story, the urge to show that you are not what they think. That urge is the doorway. If you obey it every time, you remain controlled. If you observe it, you begin to recover yourself. This is the first real exercise of Stoic strength, not fighting the world, watching yourself before you move. There is a space between what happens and what you do next. Most people live as if that space does not exist. They react so quickly that they mistake impulse for truth. But impulse is not truth. Impulse is often wounded pride wearing the mask of clarity. You think you are defending yourself, but sometimes you are only defending an image you are afraid to lose. That is a painful distinction, and it is one of the reasons focusing on yourself can feel so hard, because real focus exposes your hidden motives. It shows you that some of your principles are reactions, some of your boundaries are fear, some of your confidence is dependence on being perceived correctly. This does not mean you should doubt everything about yourself. It means you should become honest enough to separate strength from performance. The person who truly focuses on himself does not become passive. He becomes precise. He speaks when speech is useful. He stays silent when silence protects clarity. He acts when action reflects his values. He withdraws when engagement would only feed disorder. That precision creates mental space, and mental space creates peace. Not because life becomes easier, but because your mind stops being dragged into everything. This is where discipline becomes more than routine. It becomes identity. When you wake, when you said you would wake, you are not just waking early. You are proving that your word has weight. When you finish what you said you would finish, you are not just completing a task. You are restoring trust in yourself. When you refuse the easy escape, you are not just being productive. You are teaching your mind that comfort is not your master. This is how the self is rebuilt, not through declarations, through evidence. Every kept promise becomes evidence. Every controlled reaction becomes evidence. Every hour protected from distraction becomes evidence. And over time, your mind begins to believe a different story, not because you forced it with affirmations, because you proved it with behavior. That is why the real self is built in absence. In the quiet morning when nobody knows whether you got up or stayed in bed. In the private moment when you either keep your word or negotiate with weakness. In the silence after an insult, when you decide whether your ego deserves your whole nervous system. This is where philosophy becomes real. Not in the words, in the decision. The world may only notice the result, but the result is never where transformation begins. It begins in the moments too small to impress anyone. It begins in repetition. It begins when the old self asks for permission to remain, and you stop giving it the answer it wants. That is focus. Not intensity for one day. Direction repeated long enough to become character. The part of you that does not want peace. At first, it seems like distraction is the problem. The phone, the noise, the opinions, the pressure, the endless demand to respond, compare, react, and keep up. But that is only the surface. The deeper distraction is identity. You are not only distracted by what happens around you, You are distracted by the version of yourself you are trying to maintain. This is the perception break. Because if the problem were only external noise, the solution would be simple. Turn off the phone, leave the room, avoid certain people, reduce stimulation. And yes, those things help, but they do not reach the root. Because you can sit in a silent room, you can be alone and still be performing. Performing strength, performing healing, performing detachment, performing discipline, performing peace. This is why some people never feel calm, even when their life becomes quiet. The noise has moved inside. They are still asking, how do I look? What do they think? Am I becoming impressive? Will they regret underestimating me? Will people notice the change? That is not inner peace. That is external dependence wearing a cleaner mask. And this is where many self-improvement paths become another trap. People do not always improve because they want truth. Sometimes they improve because they want revenge. They want to become so successful that someone feels foolish. They want to become so composed that someone feels small. They want to become so changed that the world has to acknowledge what it missed. That kind of growth can produce results, but it does not produce peace, because the center is still outside. The audience has changed, but the dependence remains. This is the part most people do not want to hear. Some people do not actually want peace. They want relief. They want the pain to stop without surrendering the ego that keeps recreating the pain. They want strength without giving up the need to appear strong. They want focus without confronting what their focus has been serving. They want a calmer life, but not a more honest self. And without honesty, calm will always be temporary, because the hidden motive keeps moving underneath. You may stop reacting publicly, but internally you still keep score. You may stop explaining, but your silence still begs to be interpreted. You may stop chasing approval, but you secretly wait for people to notice your absence. That is not freedom. That is performance with fewer words. This is where Stoicism becomes severe. It does not flatter you. It does not tell you every emotion is sacred. It does not tell you every reaction is truth. It does not tell you that your pain automatically makes you wise. It asks whether you are ruled by what you feel, not whether you feel, whether you obey. That difference matters, because real strength is not the absence of desire, pain, fear, or uncertainty. Real strength is the ability to act rightly while those things are still present. You become strong not because nothing pulls you anymore. You become strong because you stop obeying every pull. This will divide people. Some will say restraint is repression. Some will say silence is avoidance. Some will say not reacting means letting others win. But often, the person who cannot control their reaction calls it honesty, because discipline would expose them. That is a painful line, and many people will resist it, because it touches the ego. It suggests that what they call being real may sometimes be a lack of self-command. The Stoic does not deny emotion. He refuses to be ruled by it. There is a difference. Denying emotion creates numbness. Obeying emotion creates chaos. Observing emotion creates freedom. And freedom is the real goal. Not looking strong, not appearing calm, not becoming untouchable in the shallow sense. Freedom means there is enough space inside you to choose. When someone misunderstands you, you can choose silence without feeling erased. When someone disrespects you, you can choose composure without feeling defeated. When someone leaves, you can feel pain without turning that pain into identity. That is strength, not the theatrical kind, the quiet kind, the kind that does not need to punish the world for hurting it. This is where many people fail the path. They use stoicism as armor. They say they are detached, but they are actually afraid to care. They say they are peaceful, but they are avoiding confrontation. They say they are focused on themselves, but they are secretly waiting for others to notice the absence. That is not strength. That is wounded pride wearing discipline. And if you do not examine it, it will control you from underneath. You will become colder, but not freer. More silent, but not more peaceful. More controlled, but not more honest. This is why the path must return again and again to the real self. Not the image of strength, the practice of it. Can you be misunderstood without rushing to repair your image? Can you be unseen without turning your absence into a performance? Can you feel the need for approval and still choose the action that respects your future? That is where strength becomes real, because it no longer depends on denial. It includes discomfort. It includes uncertainty. It includes the parts of you that still want the old reward, but it does not surrender to them. And this is where inner peace becomes mature. Peace is not the feeling that nothing is wrong. Peace is the knowledge that even when something is wrong, you do not have to abandon yourself. That is a different kind of life, a heavier one, but also a freer one. The Stoic path back to yourself. By the end, focusing on yourself means something different than it did at the beginning. It no longer means ignoring people. It no longer means disappearing to look mysterious. It no longer means becoming selfish, cold, or unreachable. It means returning ownership of your life to the only place it can truly belong, your own mind. That is the real promise of this path. Inner peace and strength do not come from building a life where nothing disturbs you. They come from becoming the kind of person who does not hand himself over to every disturbance. This is why the path is inward, because everything outside you is unstable. Praise changes, attention fades, people misunderstand, circumstances shift, plans break, moods rise and fall. Even the version of yourself you once defended may eventually need to die. If your peace depends on stability outside you, it will always be temporary. But if your peace is built on alignment, it becomes harder to steal. Not impossible, harder. And that difference matters. You will still feel pain. You will still face doubt. You will still encounter people who misread you, dismiss you, test you, or try to pull you back into the version of yourself they understood. But you will not be as available to the pull, because you will have practiced returning to your values, returning to your discipline, returning to your attention, returning to the self that does not need to be performed in order to be real. That is the quiet victory. Not becoming admired, becoming less dependent on admiration, not becoming feared, becoming less controlled by fear, not becoming perfectly peaceful, becoming honest enough to stop creating your own unrest. This is where the false self loses power. It loses power every time you choose action over image, every time you choose alignment over applause, every time you choose silence, not as punishment, but as protection for clarity. And slowly, your life begins to change in a way that may not look dramatic from the outside. You become harder to provoke, not because you feel nothing, because you understand what reaction costs. You become harder to manipulate, not because you trust no one, because you no longer need everyone to confirm your worth. You become harder to distract, not because the world becomes quiet, because your priorities become louder than the noise. That is strength, and it is built by focusing on yourself in the deepest sense, not the self that wants to be seen, the self that must be lived. The Stoic path does not ask you to escape the world. It asks you to stop making the world responsible for the condition of your inner life. That is not easy. It is not always comforting, but it is clean. Because once you understand this, you stop waiting for permission to become steady. You stop asking chaotic people to give you peace. You stop asking distracted people to understand your focus. You stop asking unstable environments to make you strong. You begin where you actually have power, with your attention, with your choices, with the promises you make when nobody is there to reward you. And over time, something inside you becomes less negotiable, not loud, not dramatic, just firm. You no longer need to announce that you are changing. You no longer need to prove that you are healing. You no longer need to convince the world that you have become stronger. You know by the way you move. You know by the way you pause. You know by the things that no longer own you. And that is enough, because real strength does not always look powerful from the outside. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to explain what your actions will eventually make clear. So focus on yourself, not to become impressive, not to become untouchable, not to make anyone regret how they saw you. Focus on yourself, because without that return, your life will keep leaking into places that cannot hold it. When you stop performing, you finally begin practicing. When you stop chasing recognition, you begin building evidence. When you stop asking the world to reflect your worth, you begin discovering whether you can stand without the reflection. This is where peace becomes real, not soft, not fragile, not dependent on perfect conditions. Real peace is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of self-command. And real strength is not the absence of emotion. It is the refusal to let every emotion become a master. The world will still be loud. People will still misunderstand. Old patterns will still knock on the door. Your ego will still want to speak when silence would protect you. Your fear will still want to escape when discipline would strengthen you. But now you know where the work is. Not out there. Here. In the pause before reaction. In the promise no one sees. In the decision to stop building an image and start building a self. That is the Stoic path. Quiet, difficult, unseen, and real. And when the noise fades, when the audience disappears, when no one is there to confirm who you are, the only thing left will be the self you actually built.